The night air clung to the quiet stretch of road, broken only by the hum of an old patrol truck moving steadily along the dirt. Inside, Officer James Carter, broad-shouldered, weathered face, eyes sharp yet tired, kept one hand loosely on the wheel. It was supposed to be another uneventful shift, nothing more than a lonely road and distant crickets. Then it came, a faint, strangled cry, so small it barely reached over the engine. He braked hard, gravel crunching under the tires, heart kicking faster. James rolled down the window, listening. Again, the sound, thin, pleading, fragile, cut through the silence. He switched off the engine, and the sudden stillness magnified it. A whimper, trembling, as if the night itself were crying. Flashlight in hand, he stepped out, boots sinking into dust. The beam swept across tall grass, picking out glimmers of dew. Then his light stopped. Two golden eyes shimmered back at him, wide, terrified. At first, he froze, pulse thundering. The shape was small, curled tightly in the grass, fur glistening under the pale light. A lion cub. James inhaled sharply, instinct pulling him closer, fear dragging him back. The animal whimpered again, a sound too weak to belong to a predator. Its tiny chest rose and fell in desperate effort, a paw stretched awkwardly as if broken. The sight twisted something deep inside him. The cub shifted, trying to push itself up, only to collapse. James crouched, lowering the beam. Mud streaked the little body, and its tail flicked once in feeble protest. Its nose twitched at the scent of him, ears flattening against its head. For a long moment, man and cub locked eyes. The cub's gaze wasn't wild or threatening, it was pleading. James felt the fragile weight of the moment, a silent request for help. His training screamed caution. A lion cub never strays far without its mother. Where was she? Could she be watching from the shadows, ready to strike if he touched her young? Sweat trickled down his temple despite the cool air. He scanned the edges of the road, heart hammering at the possibility of a golden shape emerging from the dark. Still, the cub whimpered, and the sound felt unbearable. James took a step back, torn. He could call the wildlife rangers, wait until morning. But every second seemed heavy. The cub's breathing was shallow, each wheeze scraping against his nerves. It looked so defenseless, like a child lost in a storm. His flashlight beam wavered, trembling with his hesitation. He whispered under his breath, "Easy now, little one, easy." The cub tried again to move, and its paw gave way. A sharp, pitiful cry pierced the night, and James flinched as though struck. His decision snapped inside him like a brittle branch. He couldn't just stand there. His boots crunched forward, his body lowering inch by inch, careful not to startle. The cub's ears flicked, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it blinked slowly, shivering, waiting. James stretched a hand, pausing when he was close enough to feel its warmth. The cub didn't lash out. Its eyes glistened with something too raw to ignore: fear, pain, trust. His chest tightened. "All right," he murmured, voice barely audible. "I've got you." And in that suspended breath of the night, the officer reached for the trembling life at his feet. James slid his hand beneath the cub, feeling its frail body tremble against his palm. Its fur was damp, sticky with mud, and the tiny ribs moved too fast beneath his fingers. He lifted slowly, bracing for a sudden cry that might echo into the dark. Instead, the cub pressed weakly against his chest, as if surrendering to the warmth. James held his breath, every nerve on edge, expecting movement in the grass around him. Nothing came. Only the chorus of crickets and the sound of his own pulse filled the night. The cub whimpered again, a faint rasp that vibrated against his uniform. James could feel its paw twitch, dragging pain with every small motion. He whispered softly, "She." "I've got you," even though he knew the animal couldn't understand. Still, the sound seemed to calm it. Its eyes fluttered half shut, exhaustion tugging it downward. For an instant, James allowed himself to feel the weight of it, not just the pounds in his arms, but the responsibility pressing into his chest. Then a noise cracked through the silence. A low rustle in the brush, followed by the unmistakable snap of a branch. James stiffened, flashlight swinging toward the sound. His throat went dry. Was it her, the mother lion? He scanned the shadows, each second stretching into eternity. The cub stirred uneasily in his arms, sensing the shift in his heartbeat. James' knuckles whitened around the flashlight handle. If she appeared now, would she see him as savior or thief? The sound came again, closer this time, and James' body tensed. He backed toward the truck, each step deliberate, keeping the beam fixed on the grass. The cub gave a faint cry and James' gut twisted. What if the mother heard that? His boots crunched loudly against gravel, betraying his position to whatever waited in the dark. Sweat trickled down his neck, soaking into the collar of his shirt. He had never felt so exposed. At the edge of the road, his truck loomed like a fragile fortress. He pulled the door open with one hand, carefully placing the cub inside on the passenger seat. The animal curled instantly, tail wrapping close, shivering against the worn leather. James shut the door softly, then leaned against it, chest heaving. The silence had returned, but his ears still rang with the phantom sounds of danger. For a moment, he let his head fall back, eyes to the stars. When he climbed in, the cub's gaze met his. It wasn't a look of fear anymore. Its eyes glowed in the dim dashboard light, almost curious, almost trusting. James felt something stir deep within, a rare, fragile thread connecting them. The animal rested its chin on the seat, exhaling a soft huff that fogged the glass. James swallowed hard, his throat tight. He hadn't expected to feel this bond. He turned the ignition, headlights spilling a pale wash across the lonely road. But his hands hesitated on the wheel. What next? Driving into the village would only create panic. How often did anyone see a lion cub in a police car? Yet keeping it out here was unthinkable. He needed help, fast, but without drawing unnecessary danger. The cub shifted, and a tiny paw brushed his sleeve as if urging him forward. James exhaled, deciding. The truck rumbled forward, gravel sprang beneath the tires. The cub's ears twitched at the sound, but it didn't move from its curled position. James kept one eye on the road, the other flicking nervously to the animal beside him. Each minute felt like a gamble. If the mother appeared, if another predator followed, if the cub didn't survive the night. Still, he drove on, the vast darkness stretching endlessly ahead, carrying both risk and hope. The road narrowed into a ribbon of dust, swallowed by thorn trees and low scrub. James kept the truck steady, eyes flicking to the cub curled on the seat, its breathing shallow, rhythmic, fragile. He reached for the radio, thumb pressing the talk button. Static hissed like a snake in tall grass. "Dispatch, this is Carter," he said, voice low. The signal splintered, dissolving into a crackle that went nowhere. He tried again, leaning into the mic as if closeness could force the distance to shrink. Nothing but empty air pushing back. He stared out at the dark, at the kinds of shadows that hide teeth. The cub stirred, a tiny sound escaping its throat, not the cry of a predator but the ache of a child. Its ears pricked toward the brush that hunched beside a boundary fence, rusted wire gleaming like a thin moon. James slowed and pulled off the road, tires crunching stones that seemed too loud. The night exhaled, and with it came a soft, low grunt. Barely there, not a roar, not a warning, a sound that carried pain like a secret. James felt his palms heat, as if the wheel had grown hot. He lifted the flashlight and stepped out. He moved slowly, the cone of light sliding over scrub and dust and broken tracks. Every bush became a possibility, every silhouette a test. The grunt came again, closer, and his breath shortened. The fence lines dragged his beam to a tangle of grass and wire at knee height. Then the world sharpened. Tawny fur, a massive shoulder trembling, a leg twisted and pinned by a loop of cable biting deep. A lioness, her head lifted, eyes blazing gold, then dimming with effort. James went cold to the wrists. He didn't need to be told what a trapped mother could do. His first step backward was instinct. The second was reason catching up to fear. He flicked the light to the truck. Between him and the lioness, a rectangle of steel and glass, a flimsy shield against a world with claws. The cub pressed its face to the window, fogging the glass, and let out a high, thin cry that cut clean through him. The lioness' head snapped toward the sound, eyes glazing with something complicated, alarm, recognition, relief tangled into one. She strained, the snare bit. She sent back with a groan that felt like gravel rolling in his chest. Behind him, a sound stitched the night tight. A distant whoop rising, then answered by another, closer. Hyenas. James' skin prickled as if the air had teeth. He dragged traffic cones and flares from the truck bed with clumsy haste, slamming the tailgate louder than he meant to. He punched the hazard lights on. Amber strobes blinked a warning that meant nothing to animals but everything to his nerves. Another whoop, this time edged with hunger. The scrub shifted as shapes came and went like bad thoughts. He grabbed the long-range radio stored beneath the seat, the one that sometimes reached the ranger outpost when the regular signal failed. "Ranger Base, this is Officer James Carter," he said, voice tight, words clipped to keep panic from leaking through. "Adult lioness in a cable snare near mile marker 74 boundary fence. Injured cub with me. Hyena activity high. Request immediate assistance. Coordinates." He rattled them off, eyes fixed on the lioness, on the wire biting her flesh. A beat of silence. Then a reply, thin but clear. "Copy, Carter. On our way." He didn't ask how long. The night would tell its own time. He popped open his first aid kit, hands moving on muscle memory. Gauze, tape, a pair of trauma shears, a foil blanket that crackled like fire. He wrapped the blanket around the cub to hold heat, leaving only a small face peeking out, eyes like wet coins. "You're all right," he breathed, steadying himself with the words he offered it. He slid the flashlight onto the hood and angled it so the beam washed the fence line, keeping the snare and the lioness in view. He needed her to see him, needed her to know he wasn't the threat she feared. The lioness shifted, a low rumble building in her chest, warning and weary all at once. James took 2 slow steps to the side, creating a line-of-sight path between her and the passenger window. The cub gave a soft, calling whine. The lioness answered with a throaty chuff, the sound folding the night in half. Her eyes locked on James' ancient, appraising, a courtroom without words. She pushed once against the cable, then stopped, panting, as if recognizing the trap held more danger than he did. In that fragile pause, the distance between a man and the wild changed shape. He clicked the siren to a low wail, letting the sound smear across the scrub like a wall. Hyena silhouettes froze at the edges, ears rotating, but bodies twitching. The hazard lights strobed, flares hissed where he dropped them in a triangle heat light noise, a flimsy fortress. He stood beside the passenger door, one palm pressed to the glass where the cub rested beneath the foil's shimmer. "Hold," he murmured, to himself, to the lioness, to the world. And in the heated breath of the siren and the smoke of the flares, the night agreed to wait. They came in closer anyway, a staggered line of shapes with sloped shoulders and eyes catching light. Hyenas, curious first, then braver, then hungry. James raised the air horn from the emergency kit and blasted a harsh metallic scream into the dark. The line buckled, then reformed. He climbed halfway onto the bumper, making his body big, his voice bigger. "Back!" he shouted, and the word broke uselessly against the thorn. He flipped the headlights to full and swung the beam. The nearest hyena flinched and skittered back, a laugh cry rattling out like broken bottles. Radio static cracked. 2 minutes out, a voice said, close enough to feel inside his chest. He didn't lower the horn. The lioness watched him, panting, every inch of her a storm that could break. The cub's breath fogged the window again. Tiny cloud, tiny universe. James felt everything narrow, the flare hiss, the drum of his heartbeat, the cold handle of the horn digging into his palm. He thought of the wire around the lioness' leg, of the way pain makes the world small. He kept the siren low and the lights high and refused to make the first mistake. Headlights swelled on the road, a second pair, then a third, white arcs cutting the night. A canvas-topped truck rolled in behind him, brakes exhaling, and 2 figures dropped to the ground with practiced grace. Rangers, one with a veterinary case clamped in one hand, the other with a long, quiet rifle that hummed of syringes rather than bullets. "Carter?" The taller one said without looking away from the fence. "Here," James answered, relief scraping his throat as the horn finally lowered. The vet shouldered the dart rifle, breath steady, eyes calculating wind, distance, mercy. The dart whipped, an insect sting crossing the air, and struck muscle high on the lioness' shoulder. She snarled, a sudden electric sound that vibrated glass. The hyenas scattered back into holes of darkness, then peered again, uncertain. The lioness heaved once against the snare. The cable sang a thin, cruel note. The vet's voice was a calm tether. "Give it a minute." James nodded even though patience was bleeding him dry. The lioness' lids drooped, lifted, drooped again. Her head lowered to the dust. The cable still bit. They moved as a small, careful machine. The vet slid a pole between the cable and flesh to guard against recoil. Another ranger braced the fence with gloved hands. James knelt opposite, gripping the trauma shears, the ground cool and rough under his knees. He cut at the thin strands with a snare looped back, metal scraping metal, the smell of rust and blood and hot grass rising in layers. The final thread pinged and the cable loosened like a curse lifting. The lioness' leg eased free, swollen, raw, but hers again. Air rushed from James' lungs like he'd been held under too long. "Let's help the little one," the vet said, eyes flicking to the truck. James folded the foil back. The cub blinked, pupils huge, and lifted the injured paw in silent explanation. He cleaned the wound with saline, the sting making the cub flinch, then cradled the tiny limb the way you hold a secret steady, gentle, loyal to its shape. The vet fashioned a soft splint from padded tongue depressors and wrap, his fingers precise, respectful. The cub leaned into James' palm as if gravity had reversed, and he was the ground. There, in the wash of headlight and dust, a badge caught a small nose. The cub pressed its face to the metal and sighed. They carried the cub to a crate and set it inches from the sedated lioness, door open, a hallway made of hope. The vet injected a reversal agent, voice low, she wake groggy. "We keep our distance." They formed a loose circle, backs aligned without instruction. People who had stood at the edge of teeth before and learned how to speak with posture. James remained at the truck's front, one hand on the hood, the other on the crate's rim. Feeling the soft thrum of the cub's breath, the sky shifted from black to the first gray confession of dawn. Birds pierced the quiet first, then the light itself began to climb. The lioness stirred, blinking through a fog that thinned with each breath. She tested her leg, found pain, found strength, then lifted her head toward the crate. The cub answered with a tumble, scrambling to the door, splint clicking softly on plastic. The lioness inhaled deeply, finding the map of her world again in scent and sound. She lifted her gaze to James, not over him, but to him, and held it for a full, measured beat. The world didn't break. It opened. When she stood, it was like a story resuming mid-sentence. She stepped toward the crate, and the cub hopped forward, nose first, heart first, into the space her body made safe. She chuffed, low and round, and the cub pressed beneath her chin, a circle completed. The rangers eased back a step. James didn't move. He let the moment breathe. The lioness turned once more, leg trembling, and looked at him. Not a promise. Not forgiveness. A recognition written in the oldest script. You kept the dark away. She blinked, slow, then pivoted toward the scrub. They walked, her stride careful, the cub's eager, two shapes restored to one. Before the brush framed them in green and shadow, the cub paused and glanced back. Its bandaged paw lifted, hovering in the morning light for a heartbeat that felt longer than a life. James reached up and tapped two fingers to the brim of his hat, a salute older than words. The hyenas were gone. The flares hissed out in thin lines of smoke. The road waited plain and patient, like a witness to the miracle it had held. James stood with the rangers until the last tail flick disappeared. No one spoke for a while. The sun found the badge on his chest and set it glowing, but tiny smudge of a cub's breath still ghosted on the metal. He felt the night leave him the way a tide leaves the shore slow, reluctant, with gifts in its pockets. He closed the passenger door gently, as if not to wake what had ended. When he finally started the truck, the engine's rumble sounded different, not louder, not softer. Like it knew something now. And so did he.